Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com, NBA insider. He joins us now for a look at the NBA playoffs first round, Kevin, where some interesting storylines have already emerged just one game in, as we have some interesting game twos tonight and a couple of game twos already in the book. Welcome back, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing well, yeah. Exciting night here as those teams try to go up 2-0, which is a difficult proposition. We see the home teams are really dominant when they lose game one.
They sure are, and a lot of times in the first round, you almost don't give the lower seeds any shot to win here. So you got an 8 seed up 1-0 you've got a 6 seed up, and you got a 5 seed, so not crazy on the 5 side. But the two Eastern Conference teams, the 8 and the 6, who do you think has a better shot of getting through those series?
Well, weirdly, I think it's the 8. I mean, along the lines of what you said coming into this, the model I have that takes into account teams' point differential during the regular season and then the head-to-head season series, because those two factors have been good predictors of the outcome of playoff series, it gave the Celtics the best, or the Bulls rather, the best shot of any lower-seeded team of pulling the upset. And everything that led to that played out in game one in terms of Chicago taking advantage of Boston's weakness on the defensive glass, and then the fact that the Celtics, even though they got the number 1 seed, they really backed into it more by how Cleveland finished the season than really playing dominantly. In terms of point differential, they were the weakest number 1 seed we've seen since the 1979 Sonics, and they certainly look vulnerable at this point.
More on Cleveland coming up, but let's say with this Boston and Chicago matchup, the Bulls, I thought they'd be a problem for Boston, mainly because of Butler and Wade, two big-time scorers, and obviously the lack of rim protection from Boston and the lack of secondary scorer. They all unfolded. So if you're moving forward here for Boston, what is the key? Because realistically, that Chicago team was a mess all season long, and here they are now with a chance to go up 2-0. So what does Boston need to do tonight?
Right, and maybe that's their best hope, is the fact that Chicago hasn't handled prosperity very well all season long. I think, first off, they're going to have to be better on the defensive glass. They actually, as bad as they were over the course of the season in terms of defensive rebounding, they were slightly better than league average after the All-Star break. They kind of got it together in that regard and then regressed dramatically in the first game of this series. And the other thing is, just find a way to just limit the damage when Isaiah Thomas is on the bench. They were minus 16 in the 10 minutes he spent on the bench in game one. Part of that was they subbed him out defensively for one possession late in the game. But, still, if you can even, limit that to minus 6 in 10 minutes, which is still not very good, you'd win the game.
Talk with Kevin Pelton. He writes, which top seeds will fall? You have Boston down 1-0. The other one, Antetokounmpo, he seemed like he's been doing this his whole career. Like, this is second nature being in the playoffs. Ho-hum. It was his first playoff game the other night. So what are you expecting for the encore?
Yeah, it was an impressive effort for him. And, it's not like it was anything fluky. It was a good game for him, but he's been doing this all season. He had a case to be in the top 5 in MVP, get that fist bout on the ballot. He was on my All-NBA second team, and really a breakthrough season for him. And the Raptors, P.J. Tucker might be a good matchup for him because he can kind of use his strength and get into Giannis's body and bother him that way. But that's only when he's coming off the bench to match up with him. So they don't have a great matchup in the starting 5. And, But the other aspect of it is, the Raptors just have to make shots. Kyle Lowry couldn't make anything from 3 in game one. DeMar DeRozan, after a nice start, really cooled off from the field. We've seen it before with those Raptors guards, but also we've seen Toronto manage to overcome it and win anyway in the first couple of rounds when they've had home court advantage. So, they're going to kind of have to do that same thing, follow the same script as last year.
Yeah, Kevin, what are they, 1-11 in their last 12 first games of each round, something like that, something crazy where they just cannot get off out of the gates going in any of these playoff series, and they do seem to get back and rebound. But I'll tell you, this Milwaukee team, young, they really seemed up for the challenge, and you add what they've done late in the year, Middleton comes back, Maker's getting minutes, and really having an impact on the defensive side. That team seems like a scary proposition for round one for Toronto.
Yeah, the surprising fact is, their point differential still wasn't very good after the All-Star break, as well as it did seem like they played with, Middleton out there, and he's become, one of the league's more underrated players, I would say. Malcolm Brogdon fitting into that starting point guard role, and then anytime they do get good production from Maker, it's just a bonus because of the fact that, Greg Monroe is such a reliable backup center who effectively is the starter in terms of the minutes he plays.
Talking with Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com, NBA Insider. The NBA playoffs continue tonight. Listen to the Celtics and the Bulls, game number 2. The coverage starts at 7 o'clock. The Jazz and the Clippers is the other game tonight. And the Jazz win game 1 of round 1. They lose Gobert, though. Is that injury, it wasn't a difference maker in round 1, but for a 7-game series, is that difference maker enough to save this Clippers team to get through a round? Because a lot of people believe, and I'm sure many have speculated, that if the Clippers get bounced, that this is at the end of this Clippers team as we know.
Yeah, despite how much Doc Rivers has sort of denied that possibility or that outcome. It's tough to say. I mean, the Jazz didn't seem to miss Gobert in Game 1. That doesn't mean they're not going to in the future. But, Jarek Favors is a nice plan B. If he's capable of playing 30-plus minutes at center, which he, kind of held up but was on fumes, it seemed like, at the end because, he had been playing limited minutes coming back from his own knee injury, which kept him out until the final week of the regular season. So, I think that's one of the big things. And then we'll see how the Clippers adjust to the fact that, the Jazz kind of relied heavily on this Joe Johnson playing power forward, these smaller lineups that were really effective for them. I think that was something that Quinn Snyder kind of knew all along was going to be an effective lineup for him, was kind of saving until the playoffs.
So there are the games tonight, and of course they're all game 2s tonight. Last night, really interested in your take on the Cleveland game here because so many people have talked about this imaginary switch that they need to turn on, and yet they haven't done it, and they're up 2-0. I think it's just a byproduct of they're just not as good, Cleveland, as they were last year, and that's okay. They won the championship last year. We didn't expect them to be superior. I think most people don't look at them as the favorite to win the championship, but still the favorite to win the East. How do you read Cleveland through 2 games in the playoffs based on what you saw through the regular season?
I mean, I do think that's a factor, that what's being kind of downplayed in the switch talk is, yes, LeBron James's teams have had a tendency sometimes to struggle in the second half of the regular season, and yes, they've tended to play better in the playoffs, but we've never seen a James team, going back to when he kind of emerged as an MVP, in 2009 in Cleveland, going back to before that, we haven't seen a James team struggle nearly this much during the regular season. So even with that switch turned on, yeah, I don't think they're nearly as good as last year's team, but we have seen moments from them defensively, and even last year's team, you could say, flipped the switch, turned up the intensity defensively during the NBA Finals as part of that comeback from a 3-1 deficit against the Warriors. So, we've seen them do it before. We've seen them do it recently against the Celtics when they won in Boston late in the regular season in a win that seemed to assure them as the number 1 seed until they kind of collapsed after that with some surprising, disappointing losses. But they haven't needed to, I think, so far against Indiana because their offense has been good enough for them to win shootouts. And that may be the case for a little while, depending on how the matchups fall.
Right. It's almost as if they understand that Indiana's just simply not good enough to beat them right now, so they can kind of go through the motions. They don't need to turn it up another level defensively because if they score 109 and you're at the same range, you've got LeBron, they don't, and that's the biggest X factor in a game where they don't play great defense, is that we're still better than you offensively.
It's a dangerous way to live, certainly, but it's one that's worked for them so far.
Right, exactly. Moving forward for Cleveland, what are they lacking that could clip them in the Eastern Conference? I think most people still think they'll get through the East, but if they don't, why is it? Or is there no way that they don't get through the East based on that reaction?
No, I don't think I definitely think it's possible that they don't get out of the East. I'm not sure if there's any one thing I'd point to. I mean, maybe it's just the lack of kind of two-way role players off the bench. Richard Jefferson, probably fills that description, which is why he was such an important figure for them in last year's NBA Finals. But you look at a lot of the guys they've collected, Kyle Korver, Channing Frye, even Darren Williams probably at this stage of his career, they're really offense-only players. And they've got, Amon Shumpert is more of a defense-only player, which is why he wasn't even in the rotation for Game 1 before stepping in for J.R. Smith with his hamstring injury after halftime of last night's game. But you don't necessarily see the guys who, are solid at both ends of the court. And I guess the lack of that would be the biggest thing that might cost them.
All right. Last night, one of the big stories of the NBA playoffs was David Fizdale basically blasting the referees. When you look at the stats on paper, he's got a good reason to voice his opinion. I don't know if it'll help, but I don't think that anybody thought Memphis had a shot to win this series. Do you think now that Game 3 becomes intriguing to watch because of his rant last night, or is this series over?
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to see what kind of effect working the referees will have, and nothing new from David Fizdale. I mean, Phil Jackson was long the master of this in terms of his comments between games and trying to manipulate things, and referees I think are human, so they also benefit from the fact that there's just old-fashioned regression to the mean. If one team has a huge advantage in free throw shooting, odds are it's not going to hold up entirely the next game, no matter what the coach does. But the public comments may help amplify that effect.
Let's take a look at tomorrow's matchups here with Kevin Pelton. Some of the other Game 2s that are on the horizon. I think Washington and Atlanta is the it's an least interesting matchup. I think people like Washington to possibly challenge Cleveland down the road, and nobody ever buys into Atlanta. Even when you have 60-plus wins, they seem to get no respect here. But does Washington, are they in trouble in this series? I mean, I know they won game number 1, but are people not putting enough stock in the Hawks?
I thought it might be a little closer coming into the series, but what we saw from the Hawks in Game 1 is what's been a problem from them all season. They just really struggle to score, particularly with their starting lineup out there on the court. They're 27th in offensive rating, worst of any of the teams that made the playoffs by a pretty wide margin. And, if you the Wizards, their defensive intensity, much like the Cavaliers, tends to come and go. The fact that the Cavs were so bad defensively in the second half of the season kind of overshadowed the fact that Washington wasn't very good itself at that end. But in this series, they can, much like the Cavs against the Pacers, I think they can rely on their offense to win this series because of the fact that the Hawks are going to have a tough time making them pay for their defensive liabilities.
Do you think Washington could scare Cleveland if they meet up?
I think that they can. They have the capability to win a shootout, but to do it 4 times out of 7 games, that's going to be a lot more difficult.
The other one that's the other two. The Oklahoma City Houston, it was almost like, okay, we gave you a lousy regular season, with the tanking and resting players. Here's what we'll do. We'll give you Harden and Westbrook in round number 1. It didn't really live up to the hype in Game 1. Will Game 2 bring Oklahoma City back? Do you see this as a 7-gamer, or is Houston and Harden just too good?
I had a Rockets at 5 coming into this series, and certainly their blowout in Game 1 doesn't change my opinion in that regard. But I think we do have to be careful of reading too much into one game. The last time, just last year, you saw Oklahoma City get blasted like this in Game 1 at San Antonio, and then come back to win the series 4-2. Don't necessarily think that's going to happen here, but that's the kind of scenario they're going to have to look at in terms of one game not being representative. I guess the worry from that standpoint, though, is you would expect that kind of blowout to involve the Rockets getting hot from three-point range with all their shooting. The fact that they did it while shooting 30% from beyond the arc, that's pretty surprising.
What's the ceiling for Houston, in your opinion? I mean, if they go on to win this series, which the way they played in Game 1, and many people thought they would, they are the 3 against the 6. But what is their ultimate ceiling? Because a lot of people look at it as a Harden, and then I don't know, who's the secondary player? Who's the next player on that team that for a playoff series getting deep, that can help them get deep? So what do you look at the ceiling for Houston?
Well, I like their matchup with San Antonio if that comes to pass in the second round. I think that their style of play can be effective against that Spurs defense, and that's really built on protecting the paint. So, if you're attacking them from the outside, that's an effective way to go. It's been a good matchup for them in the past. Now beating the Warriors, if they're at full strength, that's a much bigger task. That probably puts a ceiling on pretty much everyone in the Western Conference. If Kevin Durant is healthy with that calf strain that caused him to miss practice today and left him questionable for Game 2.
And that Warriors team, I mean, I like Portland. They're a lot of fun. It just seems that they've got the backcourt that can go toe-to-toe, but when it gets into the later rounds, the later quarters of that game, they just don't have the depth to hang. If Portland had a couple extra players that go with those two guards, you'd have a really fun series. You got a lot of points, just not enough depth for Portland, it looks like.
Well, then particularly without Yusuf Nurkic out of the lineup, we saw what a big difference he made after his acquisition before the trade deadline. So they're going to have to get him healthy to be competitive, to really stand a chance of winning multiple games in this series. I think they're probably looking at hoping to have him back for Game 3 on Saturday when they go back home. He will not play in Game 2.
All right, at the end of tonight, will we have a 2-0 series in any of these games?
I'm going to say no. I mean, I think there's a decent chance that one of those three teams does, but it's 83% of the time the home team wins Game 2 if they lost Game 1. So the odds are against any of those individual teams getting up 2-0.
Who's the star of this round so far? Jimmy Butler. His offseason, if it goes the way, if his playoff round goes the way it went in Game 1, his offseason gets interesting, eh?
I don't know, maybe in some ways less interesting because of the fact that, it's all the more incentive for Chicago to try to keep him and build around him as opposed to sending him away to Boston. But, yeah, his trade value definitely increases every time he plays like he did in Game 1.
Okay, Game 2's tonight, Bulls and Celtics right here on 97.3 ESPN. ESPN's Kevin Pelton talking NBA with us. We appreciate the time as always, pal.
All right, thanks for having me.